Okay, hello. Welcome to my channel. This is Peter again, and today, if you could tell by the thumbnail and I guess the description on the video, that we're going to talk about Bach today. Johann Sebastian Bach, who incidentally was my favorite of the old masters. And as a special guest today, we have my daughter Sara. And
Hello.
Sara is happens to be my favorite musician. so
Well,
so
that's high praise. Thanks,
yeah,
Dad.
so of course I'm one of the worst musicians known to mankind. If not,
No.
I'm certainly honorable mention. So so eh, so anyway, so we're going to discuss a little bit of Bach today. I meant to put this on too to start it. It's one of my favorite pieces, the Concerto in F minor.
Yes,
That is such a beautiful piece.
it
I
is.
wish I could play it.
It's a good one.
It is. And we'll sort of put that down and get back to things here. So today we're going to talk about Bach a little bit, and
hmm
he certainly has been of all the masters was my favorite. Obviously Beethoven and Mozart are wonderful too, but I don't know. I guess for me it was always a big deal. So
Yeah, I would agree. And Bach is in my top three. He might be my number one. And honestly, and it goes back to you, Dad. It's that I remember you had a cassette of, I believe, the Brandenburg Concertos that we used to
I,
listen to in the car.
I probably did.
You did. And I remember being like, "What's that?"
Yeah.
And you were like, "Oh, this is the Brandenburg Concertos by Bach." And what's interesting now is so that the Brandenburg Gate is in Berlin, and there's a JS Bach Park, the Brandenburg Park there. So where there's some statues to Bach and so forth. And my son Andrew's best friend here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, his grandfather owns that park.
Wow.
Yes, it's privately owned. Who even knew? I've been there.
Right, right,
So,
right, right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. And and a really interesting thing also is that Mendelssohn, I guess, rediscovered Bach,
He did.
and that's kind of interesting how that he would have potentially just slipped into obscurity. We may never have known of him, or at least not known much of him.
Well, that's exactly right because Bach was known in his life primarily as an organist. And so in his book, The Well-Tempered Clavier was somewhat known,
Yep.
respected as an almost as an exercise book, because
Hmm.
basically what he did was he took every major and minor key
Yeah.
and he composed a prelude and a fugue, and
Right.
so it was respected as basically as a textbook.
Right.
Um, and then Mendelssohn in 1829 performed the St. Matthew Passion, which was
Hmm.
one of the five passions that Bach wrote. And that began a huge Bach revival. And from then, Bach has been considered to be one of the greatest composers ever to live.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, basically tied with Mozart and Beethoven. Those are the big three.
Yeah. Right.
So, um, and in my opinion, I I find Bach to be one of the biggest brains that we've ever had. I think, and I would put Mozart in that group as well. For me, the big brains would be uh, Bach, Mozart, and Einstein. Those would be
Yeah.
our three big brains that we've had.
Yeah. For certain. Yeah.
Yes.
For certain.
So yes, and I find there's an image I sent you of the messy desk of Albert Einstein after his death.
I didn't put
Uh,
that in there because I didn't understand what that was, but maybe I can find a way to get it
that's okay.
in
So
the video.
the,
So
yeah, there's a photo of Albert Einstein's desk at Princeton University after his death in 1955,
right.
and it's an entire his desk is an entire mess. And I like to
right,
think that Bach and Mozart probably had some similar living arrangements.
right,
Just
right,
the way that their brains work. I feel that they were all probably quite neurodivergent.
right,
Um,
right.
so,
Hmm.
but anyway, back to my experience with Bach. So yeah, so I loved Bach as a child. I remember listening to cassettes of him when I was in my room reading. And of course, a lot of my early introduction to classical music. We'll see if you recognize this cover, Dad.
Oh my, yes, I do. That was my book, wasn't it?
This is a newer edition of your book.
Oh, I see. Right.
Your old book from the 1980s
Yeah.
is in a box somewhere, I believe. But
Yeah.
this is new. This is I use this with my piano students now. But I remember playing through all of these, and there's several Bach pieces in here,
Yeah.
uh,
Right.
uh,
Right.
condensed
Right.
down for an early piano. But um,
Right.
so Bach he led a really interesting life, and one of the things I find most fascinating about him is that he was a working musician, very much like myself. He worked for churches his whole life.
Right. Right.
Um, and he was supported by the gentry,
Right.
um, but and he was supported by several churches, of course, but he was also supported by princes and so forth, kings, and um, but that he was in many ways just kind of a regular guy.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I didn't. There's no real uh, historical information saying that he was ever like tortured by his music, or he was particularly emotionally involved with his music, or that he was led this great artistic life. While he did live a great life, it was a life of a working man who was just incredibly prolific. And in fact, his works are more than anything else, I think they're quite mathematical.
Mm.
So it's just
Yeah. Yeah. I
so
agree with that. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah.
it's sort of the life of a man who was constantly thinking,
Right.
just constantly thinking, and so he he was from a musical family,
Right.
a very
Right.
musical family. His father and his uncles and some of his siblings were all composers,
Right. Right.
and they all taught him music from an early age. So he
Right.
grew up in this incredibly musical environment.
Right.
Um, and I think one of the things that I find really funny is that when he was, I think he was like 18 or so, he was turned down for an
Mm-hmm.
organist position by somebody, some poor fool. So
Mm-hmm.
it was in a place called Zangerhausen. So
Mm-hmm.
he applied to be their resident organist, and they turned him down. And
Wow.
he had some career ups and downs.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
he
That's,
had yeah so he had yeah so he was I mean anybody who's worked the sort of jobs that I worked, that Bach worked, knows that there are ups and downs. There are regime changes. There are, you fall out of favor. Music,
the world of music, as you know, right? Yeah.
yes, and well, and by the
I
time
mean,
Bach
really
died, he
never
was
changed, right? Even since his day, probably. So. So.
exactly well, and the world of music in Bach's time, by the time he died, he was considered to be quite a conservative. He was so. Um, so he was born in 1685 and he lived until 1750, which is by most standards considered to be the end of the Baroque era.
Yeah.
And that was where the early classical era was starting to take off.
Yeah.
So yeah, and some of his children were considered to be classical era composers.
All 20 of them. So.
Yes, so he
Yeah.
did. Yes, he had 20 children.
Was it
He
20
had
children from one mother, or is it multiple
two,
mothers?
two,
From
two.
two.
Yeah.
Okay.
So seven with the first one and 13 with the
Right.
second one,
Right. Now,
and
one of them was
only
quite successful, I think, wasn't he?
CPE Bach, perhaps.
Yeah.
That was Carl Philipp Emanuel. Yeah,
Yeah.
or Johann Christian Bach. Those are the two. So
Yeah.
CPE Bach was one of his oldest children with his first wife, and Johann Christian Bach was the son of uh, his second wife, Anna Magdalena.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right. Oh, by the way, your camera, normally, so I'm not quite seeing all of your head.
oh,
There you go. There you go.
sorry. There we go.
There we
I'll
go.
move back a bit here as
Yeah,
I'm
there we go.
sitting here better.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
so
interesting. Right. Right. So.
yes, yeah. So he was yeah, so but he had some career up and downs. He did.
Yeah.
So like for instance, his first real job, he became disenchanted within the first few years that he was there because he simply felt that the choir and the musicians.
Oops.
Whoop,
Yep.
sorry,
You got it.
call.
Back again.
The choir and the musicians were not up to the task of performing his music. And he was sort of constantly complaining about that. And then he lost his temper and he ended up yelling at a bassoonist and called him a zippelfagotist, which is translated to a weenie bassoonist.
Ooh, nice, nice.
And then the guy went after him and beat him savagely with a stick later on that night.
Oh
So,
my God.
so that turned into a little court case, which the bassoonist was forgiven, and Bach was told to be less severe with his musicians,
Right,
which
right,
he did not like very much.
right,
So
right,
and he was never, so that was in the Weimar was where he was, and he was never really very very happy there.
right.
He had the ability, which as musicians we're all very grateful to have the ability to be paid to do music instead of having to do it on the side. So he was being paid to constantly write, which was great for him. But I always had the feeling from Bach that he was looking for more, looking for something just a little bit up to his standards. He was a man with incredibly high standards.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
Um, so
Yeah.
one of the things that
Oops, wrong one.
whoop,
I put the wrong picture in there. That's all right. Go ahead.
oh,
Continue.
so
Okay.
one of the things that actually was a source of tension in his first job at Weimar was that he decided to leave for 4 months. He just took off for 4 months to go study with, I don't know if you've ever heard of Dietrich Buxtehude.
Can't say I have. No.
All right. Well, one of those scores that I sent you. So
Oh
actually,
yeah.
this is
Okay.
one of the
That might be
earliest.
that might be one of the ones on the screen. It was the smaller one. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be the one that it sort of almost looks like hieroglyphics. It doesn't
Yeah.
look like notes. So
Yeah,
this was
that's the
actually
one. Yeah.
this was just discovered recently, like a month ago.
Oh, no
This,
kidding. Wow.
yeah, one of the earliest ones of him. So it's actually organ tablature. So basically, he went north to hear Buxtehude play and to study with his teacher, who was named Reinken, who was a great organ improvisationalist, which was something that was becoming popular in the Baroque period, but sort of died out. And later, Reinken spoke with Bach, I think maybe like 20 years later, and was like, I really thought that the idea of improvisatory playing was something that was dying, but you've really revived it. It's really alive in you.
Hmm.
And it has survived. Like,
Yeah. Hmm.
like you know what style of music heavily relies on improvisation is jazz,
Right.
and a lot of that it comes directly down from the Baroque.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
in fact, Handel was George Frederick Handel, another German composer, who by the way never met Bach.
Really?
They
Yeah.
Yep, they only lived about 100 kilometers away from each other, and they were born in the same year, 1685, and they never met.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
So ships passing in the night, I suppose.
I guess
Um,
so. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
guess
but
so.
Handel was so with improvisatory playing. There was a point where he was doing something, and a soprano was um, doing this massive improvisation, and Handel just sort of stopped, and he was like, "When you're finished and you can return to the note, we will move on." He did not care for it at all.
Gotcha.
Like he liked Handel liked things more minimal, whereas Bach was sort of the other direction. Um, so anyway, he did marry his second cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, her name was Maria Barbara Bach, and she was so they were married when he went to oh, I'm trying to remember the name of where it was, but he left Weimar for a few years, and he worked for Prince Leopold. Um, which was actually a great opportunity for him because he was able to. This was not very common at the time, but he was actually able to compose a lot of secular music
Mm-hmm.
because Prince Leopold was a Calvinist, and so he hired him, and he was a very supportive person. Paid Bach very well, but
Mm-hmm.
Calvinists did not like complicated music in the worship.
Mm.
So Bach really did not have a very hard job with him. So he was able to focus a lot of his time, and that was where he wrote a lot of those instrumental concertos. And so a lot of that music that we know that we love
Right.
was written in that time.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but anyway, so he did end up going back to Weimar where he was,
Right. Right.
and yeah, so he had an okay time there, I think, but he was it, it ended on a sour note, shall we say? Because
Pardon the pun.
well, his music was starting to become considered to be more old fashioned, and he started to fall out of fashion, and he wanted to quit. Um, and they threw him in jail.
Yep. Yep. There we go. Yeah.
And they said either you come back to work or you stay in jail. And he said, "I'll stay in jail. That's fine." And he was composing in the jail for about a month, and then finally they let him go and they fired him, which was
Ah.
what he wanted.
Of course you did. Yes. Those musicians.
Oh, yes. How
Yeah.
dare you want to quit this job?
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yes. Well, if I didn't mention it, did I mention it that Sarah, you are a musician in that
yes.
you've got several things going on. You're a
Yes.
teacher. You
Yep.
have you have a studio. You have a client studio. You teach voice and keyboard,
Yep.
and you're also part of a choral group. Get that
Yeah, I'm a
going on.
performer as well, and
Right.
I'm
Right.
part of
Right. Right.
I'm
Yeah.
part of a choral group called St. Mary's Schola up in Maine. But my church is down in Massachusetts, and I live in New Hampshire, so I'm
Right.
sort of
Right.
central to everything.
Yeah. Right. So you're music director for the church. You've been doing that for some number of years now, right?
Yeah, yeah, I've been there for 12 and a half years
Have you
now.
really? It's been that long. Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Time
it's
flies when
crazy.
you're having fun.
I know.
So, so
Yeah. So that's I can keep track of it because Andrew, my son, was a few months old I was when I
oh,
started
right.
church, and
Yeah. Right.
he's
Right.
turning 12. He's turning 12 this month.
Right. There we
So,
go.
or next,
There we go. That's a
yeah.
good. That certainly is the
So,
case, isn't it?
yes.
So,
Speaking of
so
birthdays, it is Bach's birthday. It's his 339th birthday this month,
wow. Yeah.
which is why I've had Bach on the brain.
Yeah.
His
Absolutely.
birthday is,
Yeah. Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
March 31st.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah, so
Right.
I do the social media for my choral group and for my church, and I've been mentioning Bach quite a bit.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
yeah, so
So,
he's
so you are a mezzo soprano, right? Are you
I am.
you're
Yep.
still a mezzo soprano?
Yeah.
Does that ever
I've
change with people?
yes. With men, rarely. Once men sort of hit adulthood, the voice does not. It's rare that it changes.
Right.
Uh, the only times that it really would be if the man starts to take singing lessons and discovers that his voice was never the original part he thought it was. That
Mm.
somebody,
Mm.
that somebody really works with him is like, actually, you were always more of a tenor, or actually, you were always more of a baritone, or whatever.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so that does happen sometimes, but women's voices can actually change because of we our bodies go through these sort of hormonal fluctuations through our lives, um, and so we can have the voice can settle lower or higher. Things like childbirth, menopause, all of that can really affect the voice.
I'm sure it
Um,
can. Yeah, that's for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
but mine has settled a little bit lower than where it was when I was in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
But I still consider myself basically to be a mezzo soprano.
Right. Right. And you've
So,
got in the teaching related to the teaching world, you've got 2 graduate degrees, right? Is that right?
yeah,
Yep.
I do.
Yep.
So I have a master's from the University of Southern Maine from what's now known as the Osher School of Music there. I was their first ever master's in voice student. I was the guinea pig. It was fun. It was nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then I
Mm-hmm.
went to
That
the
was a great
Manistee
little school. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a great school. And
Yeah.
then I went to the Mannes Conservatory in New York for 2 years, and I received what's called a professional studies diploma,
Hmm.
which is like an artist diploma, which is a graduate degree,
Hmm.
where I basically just very much studied voice and opera. That was all I did. I didn't have to really take any other like theory or history or any other classes. It was just a deep dive into voice and opera.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
it was
sounds
fun.
good. Sounds
It's
good.
nice to
So,
be in New York.
yeah, very good. So,
Expensive.
yeah, that's great. Now, do you in back quickly to back to Bach,
Back to Bach, please. Yeah,
and
yeah.
oh, and it's one thing we're going to do too to finish the. Uh, do you keyboard wise? That's probably where you have students work. So,
Oh yeah.
any Bach pieces and works. Yeah.
Oh yes. In fact, you'll probably recognize my student Erin just finally finished this one.
Da, da, da.
Yeah. Yeah. So you remember many, I'm sure. Did you ever work on that one, Dad?
Which one?
So that's the minuet in G,
Oh, the
which is
menu.
from.
I think I'm sure I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I
Yeah,
did.
yeah, I
Yeah.
did. I'm sure you remember me working on it. So
Oh
that's
yeah.
from the Anna Magdalena notebook. So
Ah,
Anna Magdalena was Bach's second wife.
right.
She was 16 years younger than he was. After his first wife rather unexpectedly passed away, he met her about a year later, um, and she was a very gifted soprano. So he composed this notebook, which many of the pieces actually were not his own creations. He arranged them, and that includes this one.
Right.
Um, and that
Right.
was actually not known until it was during our lifetime that it was discovered that. So, for instance, the Minuet in G, the one that I just played, is actually by somebody named Christian Petzold.
Mm,
So Bach never wrote that.
mm,
But he arranged the version of it as a series of exercises for his wife to learn how to play the piano.
right. Right.
So
Yeah.
yes, a happy wedding gift, honey. Here are 30 pieces I would like you to learn to play.
Yes. Yes. Indeed. Indeed. So.
Yeah,
So
but
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's interesting. There have been some rumors about her, and
Oh really?
most of the
Interesting.
Bach community refutes them. But there is a man named Jarvis, I believe, from Australia, who insists that Anna Magdalena Bach uh, composed I believe it was some of Bach's cello suites,
Hmm.
and also part of the first that she assisted with one of the arias that he wrote, and believes that she also wrote one of the preludes from the Well Tempered Clavier.
Wow.
So
Wow. Then that's a
um,
popular one. Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
So there's now, of course, many Bach purists and historians have said absolutely not. That was all J.S. Bach himself. There's no way she really wrote them, but this man is saying, nope, she wrote them under his name.
Ah.
Um, well,
Yeah.
and there is something. So in the Baroque period, there were women composers,
Hmm.
but if they wrote under their own name, their work was kind of ignored,
Hmm.
you know. So
Right.
it was very very difficult. In fact, there was a woman who was known to be basically she was a little bit older than Bach. I think she was born around 1618, but she was considered at the time to be more prolific than any man or woman alive.
Hmm.
And she
Hmm.
never had, so where Bach and Mozart and many of those people enjoyed quite a bit of uh, sponsorship from churches and royalty.
Hmm.
She did not get that, and many women did, especially when they were publishing under this. So her name was Barbara Strozzi. Yeah, and she's 1619 to 1677. She composed a lot of music. Now she was not as prolific as Bach, but he was he was incredibly prolific. Uh, so
Right.
we have we have a little bit over 1,000 pieces by him that we know of
Wow.
that
Yeah.
that are published.
Wow. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we know of at least about 100 cantatas and then 25 to 30 other pieces that we know he wrote that have been lost.
Mm. Mm.
And then there's whatever the volume, and this is basically unknown, whatever the volume of music is that he wrote that is lost, that we don't have any record of it.
Right.
And that could be, who knows how much that was.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
So, for instance, the five passions I was telling you about. So, Mendelssohn, the St. Matthew Passion. We have the St. Matthew Passion. We have the St. John Passion. We know he wrote three other ones, but they're gone. They never survived.
Mm. Mm.
So
Into obscurity, I guess.
into obscurity.
Yes,
Into
well,
obscurity.
the last page I put on here is the is the ones with the jokes. So
I love the Bach
Schwarzenegger.
I'll be Bach.
I'll be back. Of course, that had to be there. So
Yes.
and this I've got that one on there. The front and front and back, Bach. So so those are
Bach flip.
clever people, and then so that's so that's all pretty funny. So.
Yeah.
So indeed. Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. I think we'll call this a good start here. Got a few tweaks to do in this first video we're doing. We're gonna hopefully we're gonna do some more of these. The next one will be about keyboards, so that'll be kind of a fun one. Sarah teaches keyboard and will have a lot to say about that. I'm sure.
I will.
You will. So. I'm going to say thank you, everybody, for listening. Let me put this back up on the right one here. Nope, wrong one. There we go. So I'm going to say thank you to everybody for tuning in. Please hit the like button if you like this. Give us some comments. What you think about Bach and so forth, so on.
Yeah. We should do a Bach part 2 at some point, because we never got to his time in Leipzig or the botched eye surgery that killed him, any of that good stuff. So,
oh wow!
Well, botched eye surgery is a good thing, but
yeah, right. Yeah, that would be true. So we'll save that for a future one. So
Bach part 2, we'll be Bach.
Bach part 2, we will be back. So anyway, thank you for joining us. Feel free to put some comments. We love comments and like to see some discussion in there. Subscribe to the videos if you feel like it. And thank you for chiming in. And Sarah, thanks a lot.
All right.